Welcome to Fox News Sunday Panel Plus with Scott Brown, Marjorie Clifton, Karl Rove, and Evan Bayh. And one of the subjects we didn't get to with the panel, but it's going to be a big story this week, is guns. The Republicans, some of the Republicans, talked about trying to filibuster, block the bill even coming up. They lost rather badly, 68 to 31, 32. And so they're going to bring amendments to the floor, including the Manchin-Toomey amendment, which would expand the background check. Let me start with you, Karl. How significant that they were able to beat the filibuster right off the top, and how effective do you think the president's use of the Newtown families has been this week in changing the mood on Capitol Hill?
Well, I'm not certain how effective it's been in changing the mood on Capitol Hill. People were either open to this or they were not. Frankly, the point that Senator Cornyn made I thought was a good one. Anything we're talking about now in the background check proposal of Manchin and Toomey would not have stopped any of these four previous horrific murders. But look, I think there was a little bit of an overreach. I mean, people want this issue to be discussed. They want it to be decided, and we don't need to block everything in the Senate.
So overreach by the Senate Republicans?
By some of the Senate Republicans. And look, we have the Republican House. We have the NRA actively involved. We have two thoughtful people who are supportive of gun rights, fashion this compromise, this process. I suspect the final legislation that the Senate passes or that the House considers or offers is going to be somewhat different than what we're seeing now. But I'm hopeful that this is something where a consensus can be built. In the 1990s, the NRA was open to closing the so-called gun show loophole, and we will now see a process go forward over the next months, not just this next week, but over the next several months, that I think might result in a consensus about how to do that.
What's your guess? I understand it's a guess, but do you think Manchin-Toomey passes this week or not?
I don't know, because again, going back to Senator Brown's regular order issue, I think there's a lot of concern, about how little time is going to be considered in committee, how little time for amendments. This thing is, if we want to get it done, we shouldn't place a one-week deadline on getting it done on the floor of the Senate.
Senator Bayh, your thoughts about the whole issue and the likelihood of what's going to get through, if anything?
Anytime you've had a national calamity like the Newtown shootings, it's just not a tenable position in the Senate to say we're going to filibuster and not even talk about things that could be done. You just discuss ideas. And so there was a strong bipartisan majority for at least going forward. My guess is that Manchin-Toomey will probably pass. You've got Susan Collins has been supportive. Toomey obviously is supportive, so you need three other Republicans with Joe Manchin out there.
That, of course, assumes that you're going to get all the red state Democrats.
Well, I was just going to say, with Joe Manchin, who's famously shot the cap-and-trade bill in one of his first ads, and he's very strong on Second Amendment rights, out in front, that should provide some comfort for other Second Amendment Democrats. So my guess is, with the assault weapons ban out, with the thing dealing with high-capacity magazine clips out, with all that out, my guess is you'll get almost unanimous, probably unanimous Democratic support. So bottom line, my guess is it passes.
Marjorie?
Well, I do think that it's also, as you pointed out, a unique time given the calamity, and sometimes, unfortunately, it requires that to actually get momentum, and we do still have that public opinion momentum, and I think the Obama administration using the Newtown families to re-energize that frustration and that hurt, but also that imperative to get something done will help. We were looking at 64% of Americans supporting the background checks originally, and I think there is broad public opinion, which of course drives our legislators in getting things done. So I would say it's a pretty safe bet, again, with moving the magazine and assault rifle pieces out of it, that it could likely pass. But you never know.
Senator Brown.
When you're talking about changing a constitutional right, it has to really have the highest scrutiny, and you have to have the most input, I think, with the fair and honest debate with every legislator, number one. Number two, the Schumer bill's out. It's not going to pass. The Toomey-Manchin bill, I think it passes.
And let me just briefly explain. What Toomey-Manchin would do is that this is Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat, Pat Toomey, a conservative Republican, have come up with this idea to expand the background check to all commercial transactions. So not only as it now is with dealers, but also with gun shows, anything on the internet, anything if you even put an ad in the newspaper, that you have to go through a background check. On the other hand, if it's between friends or family, no background check.
And that's the key. And what you just said about the second part, and being able to give it to your kid, give it to a friend. Those kind of personal relationships is important. I think it passes 68-70.
Yeah.
Really? So you think it is? You think Republicans will buy in?
Based on my conversations with my colleagues, yeah.
And an important thing, no federal registry of those sales. That you keep the records at the at the point of sale, right, the gun store, or whatever, or the gun show, but there's no federal registry of those, which is really important. And it's amazing how tone-deaf people like Schumer are to people's concerns about there being a national federal registry of all guns.
I want to ask you about one other question before we go on this, Karl, and that is the question of presidential action. When this first happened, Newtown, and the president began to push, Joe Califano, who was a top aide to Lyndon Johnson, talked about what they did. I believe it was in 1968 after the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, and he said, we've got 10 days. We've got to get going on this. Actually, I'm not sure. It may have been after the assassination of Jack Kennedy. But at some point after a horrific thing, he said, we got 10 days to do this. And he felt at that time, this is in December, that even though you had the fiscal cliff and all of those budget issues, that the president should have brought this up and tried to get it through when it was at a fever pitch, the demand for gun control. Did this president wait too long, that we're now 100-plus days out?
Well, I think so, but it's also a different president. People, whether you liked Lyndon Johnson or disliked Lyndon Johnson, you had confidence in his ability to cut a deal. He knew how Capitol Hill worked, and he had the tissue of relationships that allowed him to pick up the phone and call Everett Dirksen or call somebody on Richard Russell on the Democratic side and make things happen. This president has no similar set of relationships, even on the Democratic side, to allow him to do that. So he is forced to do things like loading up Air Force One with the Newtown families and bringing them to Washington to do his work on his behalf. And it's interesting. We've talked about a couple of subjects today, immigration and guns. The success on these is going to be determined by their distance from the president, not by their closeness from the president, by having other people draft them and not the president draft them.
No, it's certainly true on immigration reform that all of the Gang of Eight said, stay out of this. If this plan ever is called the Obama plan, it's dead.
Right.
Thank you, panel. Check in with us throughout the week. Let us know what you think about the fate of gun control. Look for my Monday edition of Wallace Unplugged. You can find it right here at foxnewssunday.com. And we'll see you back here next Sunday.